4 years ago, I made a video about using an iPhone as a tracker for virtual production. And if you're a subscriber to this channel, you probably came through that video. The solution I presented at the time, as much as I wanted it to spark conversation and development, nothing really came of that. I mean, people talked about it, people tried their own ways of doing it, but nobody could really get it working with just using an iPhone as a tracker. And it was really disappointing because it was so close. We had it working, just the sync was wrong, frame rates were tough. And then Unreal kind of abandoned their VCam app for a couple of years. I think it was only until a couple of months ago where they finally re-released it and fixed it up to the point that it works. In the last 4 years, there have been a couple of promising things. There was Assimilate Live Effects, which said it would allow you to use an iPhone as a tracker, and as much as I tried, I could never get that to work properly. There was CamTrack AR, which was a really promising iPhone app from FX Home, and it worked pretty well, but there was some drift issues, and then about a year after it came out, they just I think they were bought by Artlist, and the company just kind of has not updated anything in the last 2 years or so. There's another couple in the last year or two that appeared and then just kind of vanished, and they never actually came to market as far as I can tell. And it really just seemed like this was never going to happen. But what I want to talk about is what I think is probably the most affordable solution. And I mean, you still need a good computer, you still need an iPhone, and you still need a couple little gadgets that I'll go over. But I think it's at a point where at least I can do it with most of the things I have around the house. I had to buy a couple little things for $30-40. I think this is a total solution that is only maybe $4,000 to $6,000 in total if you were to think about having a really good computer with a good NVIDIA graphics card, having an iPhone. And the biggest change came from this software. So Aximmetry is, as you can see, an all-in-one virtual production platform. And this has been around for years now, but it was quite expensive before. What really changed was this. So it has always been quite expensive for the broadcast and professional version. It was always out of my budget to get the professional one. And the studio version, while it was free, it had a watermark. And so it was like, well, I can learn as much as I want and then save up the money to get the professional version. But then about 6 months ago, they did this, where you pay $20 a month for no watermark or $200 a year for no watermark. And really the difference between broadcast, professional, and studio is that there's no support really for the studio version other than the forum, and you can't really use SDI or NDI. So this method doesn't really need any of those things anyway, so we'll get into it. And I really want to walk through every step of the process because there are 2 videos out there kind of exploring this already, but they skip a lot of steps that if you're new to this, you're going to be totally lost. It took me like 2 days of experimenting after seeing those videos to kind of put all the pieces together, and I've been playing with Aximmetry for a long time. So if you're new to it, hopefully this video will give you literally everything step by step to do what you need. So first of all, Aximmetry is its own software program. It's like really a broadcast software. It has chroma keying, it has a lot of video filters and effects, and it's a node-based system that can get kind of confusing if you're new to node-based stuff. But it works really well. It's solid. It's used by professionals all over the world. And it has, if you don't want to get into all the tracking stuff, you can just film somebody in front of a green screen with a static camera and easily place that into an Unreal scene. It's really pretty simple to do that kind of thing. And now with the Aximmetry Eye app, which is still in beta at this point, they've really made it so that almost anyone with an iPhone and a computer can do it for $20 a month, which is a pretty good deal, I think. So when you download and install Aximmetry, it's going to come with its own version of Unreal Engine. This is their own modified version, so it's not like just downloading a plugin and installing it into the version you already have. It will be called Unreal Engine for Aximmetry. They are usually kind of one version behind whatever the release is. So the current release of Unreal Engine is 5.4, and Unreal Engine for Aximmetry is at 5.3. They wait for the first patch to come out before they move to the next version of Unreal. So that's just something to keep in mind. You probably want to work on a project in Unreal Engine for Aximmetry. Okay, let's get into the things that you will need to make this work technology-wise. So first of all, we have our iPhone. This is an iPhone 14, and I've got this small rig cage on it, which has got like places to mount tripod mounts, and it's got a cold shoe here. This thing is like my daily case. As you can see, it's all beaten up. It's a great sturdy case. It's very heavy, but it keeps the iPhone really nice and protected. And what it'll let you do is mount different accessories. So here's one of the handles that comes with it. And I know this is backwards, but I'm going to just put it on. So yeah, I have two of these handles, and so you could use it this way, which is going to help. Not only that, it's got all these quarter 20s, because you're going to need to mount quite a few accessories. So here's the iPhone. When I tried the Aximmetry Eye app with my iPhone 12, I think it was running for maybe 20 or 30 seconds before I got a warning that it was like a thermal warning that it was getting too hot. And that starts to affect the performance of the app. And you start dropping frames, and you don't want to do that. So the solution here is to get one of these. And this is just like it's just like a fan, basically. This one is a MagSafe one. Just sticks to your iPhone like that. And it would be perfect if it was just like this, but at least this one doesn't have any kind of battery. So you need to be able to mount a battery to it. This is a 5000 mAh battery, and here's the annoying part with this is you've really got to get something to mount the battery to the camera. So let's do this. It starts to become a little unwieldy, and just going to plug that guy in here. There you go. So this was about 30 bucks. You can get them cheaper or much more expensive. This was another, I mean, you might have one of these lying around, but you really need some way to mount it to your phone. It's not something I would want to be running and shooting with. And I think that's something to consider. You're going to maybe want a shoulder mount. I was hoping to be able to gimbal mount this to get just any of those little jitters away. That's not going to happen, and I need to find a better solution for this. That said, there are some new USB batteries coming out that have a quarter 20 screw on them, so you could use it as a handle and as a battery. So I think that might potentially be a good situation, though I haven't really tried it yet, so I'm not 100% sure. With 5000 mAh in this, I get a couple of hours of cooling on this. So you got to keep that in mind, whether you're going to need multiple USB batteries if you have a long day of shooting, or if you're going to have to charge it, because you really need to be cooling the phone the entire time you're doing this process. So the other thing you're going to need is some kind of Ethernet adapter for your iPhone. You can do this on Wi-Fi, but you're going to start dropping frames at some point, probably, even if you're using your own secure network. It's taking away all the mobility of the iPhone to some degree, because you're going to have wires dangling off it and adding all these gadgets to it. But I think that's kind of the price you have to pay to be able to do this. So here is an adapter I got for maybe 15, 20 bucks, just an RJ45 input that goes to a Lightning port. And if you're using an iPhone 15, you're going to want one of these that has the USB-C and also an RJ45. So something like that, that'll probably set you back 20, 30 bucks. So now we're in about, not including the cage, we're talking about 100 bucks here. The cage is probably another 100. So there you go, about 200 bucks plus your iPhone. And hardware-wise, that's kind of all you need, other than a green screen and some lights. And the final thing you're going to need is something that's fairly simple to get, and that is one of these. An Erlico marker. You're gonna need to get one of these printed out. My printer doesn't work, because that's what printers do. They just stop working after a couple of weeks. So I went to the print shop down the street, got a couple of these made, because I know my dogs are gonna eat them when they're lying on the ground. What this is gonna do is set the origin point of your scene. If you do any kind of 3D stuff, 000 is kind of your origin of where everything moves out from. This is gonna help you set that within Aximmetry, which we're going to get into in a little bit. there's a lot more we got to do before we get there.
Please install Aximmetry DE on your computer and Aximmetry Eye on your iPhone to follow along.
So once you've installed Aximmetry, you're going to find Unreal Editor Aximmetry listed in your apps, and you're just going to open that up. If you have another version of Unreal Engine already installed, you'll see all your projects here. But what I want to do is go to Film and Video Live Events, and we're going to make an Aximmetry blank project. I'm just going to call this Eye Test. And that's it. We're going to create it. So here is Unreal for Aximmetry, and interface looks basically the same as Unreal Engine, other than this up here, which is the Aximmetry menu. And I'm going to go over some of this in a little bit. But the first thing we're going to do is open up our Epic Games, go to the marketplace. Now you can generally build a scene with any assets you have, but I wanted to use something that I know is free for this one. So we're going to go to free Epic Games content, and we're going to search for the environments here. And you could find this automotive bridge scene, which I've already downloaded. It's absolutely free. And once you click on it and you've got it installed, you're just going to say add to project. And the first thing you'll notice is if you're looking for, we call this Eye Test, it's not listed here. So what we have to do is check Show All Projects. And that'll show us all our Aximmetry files. So now we should be able to see Eye Test. I'm going to select that. And again, you're going to get this warning, asset not compatible. All you're going to do is choose the closest install number to the version of Aximmetry you have. So here we go. Select version 5.3 and add to project. Let's go back to Unreal, and we're going to open the content drawer and look for the automotive bridge scene. We're going to go straight to the maps folder. And we're going to go to Bridge P and open that up. It's a big scene. There's lots of vantage points. You'll easily be able to find your way around it versus sometimes if you have an empty scene, you'll open it in Aximmetry and you'll find your cameras way out there in the middle of nowhere. This is a nice scene to play around with for testing. And so we've basically got everything set up in here. All we're going to do is go to Aximmetry, add camera. Now we've got a couple of options. So green camera means using a green screen, and here's for LED walls. So as we're using a green screen and we want it to be tracked, we're going to choose the second option. There's also one that's got a mix of virtual and tracked, virtual being just a static shot against a green screen, which you can use a virtual camera to move around. And we'll choose that. And all it does is add a little camera to the scene. Basically, that's about it. We're now going to save the file. Very important here, we're going to go to our project settings. And under Maps and Modes, we're going to go and find that Bridge P level. And just drop it in to both those slots. And the reason we did that is because Aximmetry only looks at one map per project file. So you've got to make your game default map into the map that you intend to use within Aximmetry. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is go to Cook Content for Aximmetry. This is where it's going to prepare all your files to be used within Aximmetry. And the first time you do this, it's going to take a long time. The way that you can make sure that it's working and not frozen is by going to Show Output Log and just watching the countdown here. So we've got a total of 4,095 objects that need to be cooked, and that countdown's slowly going to move down. The good thing is the next time you update the project, if you move some objects around and you want to cook again, it will not take nearly this long. It'll take sometimes within seconds. It's really just got to update the objects that have been changed since your last cook. Okay, so our scene is cooked. I'm just going to save that again, and I'm going to close out Unreal Engine. And now we're going to open Aximmetry itself. And what you want here is the Composer Studio DE. So once it opens up, this is our startup configuration. And this is where we can choose different video outputs. So we can have a second monitor that has a full screen display of what's going on in Aximmetry. And Device Mapper is where you'll choose both your camera tracking, and under video, you're going to be able to choose whatever camera you're using. In our case, it's going to be an iPhone. But we're not at that step yet, so we're just going to start with the basics here. Okay, this is Aximmetry. It looks blank and empty. One thing I'd really suggest is if you don't have processor load on your screen right away, just go up to View and find processor load here. That just gives you a reference of how intense your GPU and your CPU are running, and it's really good to keep an eye on when you're doing a scene. So this corner is really just a file browser, and this is where we'll be working in our node window and in our pin values, where we're going to adjust and change things. So the first thing we're going to do is go to New Compound, and that'll basically give us a blank project. And what we want to do next is go to Common Studio, Camera, and we're going to find Tracked Cam Unreal, and we're going to use this 3-camera setup. We don't really need more than that, so we're going to just drag this into the window, and here we go. So we have this, which looks like a lot of gibberish, frankly, and to me, most of it still is, even after I've been playing with this a while. But what we're going to do is find that project of ours, our Unreal project. And so I'm going to go to my Unreal Projects folder and just grab my project file and drag it in as another compound. Now, once it's loaded up, you're going to get all these extra pins here. The first thing we're going to do is connect the out from our project to the rendered of this guy. And we're going to take the B mask and also connect it here. And then you're just going to connect the things that match up here. So out size, control data, B texture, B reflections, and B shadow texture. And then from here, we're also going to grab our preview and click it off to the side here. That's going to be our output, and you can see we've got something coming up in this preview window. And we're also going to do an out. That'll let us save a file later on if we need to. So as you can see here, when we select any of these nodes, we get different pin values here. This will all make sense later, I promise. So the other thing we need to know about is these little tabs up at the top. We've got flow, which is where our node flow is. We've got cameras, which if we have multiple cameras, this is where we would switch them. And we have inputs, which is where we'll do a lot of our adjusting. So right now, if we turn off input 1, that's the camera input, which we have no camera set at the moment. We're going to see this scene of our bridge, which is exactly what we want to get started with. So here's a quick look at my little living room setup here, where I've got this Elgato green screen, a little bit of a green fabric on the floor, And this is going to be our test subject, which is Frédéric Chopin. If you don't have a bust of Frédéric Chopin, you could use Beethoven, Mozart, or Tchaikovsky. That's okay. And here is just an apple box to get a little height. And on the ground, I've taped our Aruco marker. I've taped it so that we're going to have a origin that we could always go back to and reset and make sure we're in the same place. You'd have to make sure that the black square is 180 centimeters by 180 centimeters. Over here is our iPhone, and you can see the cooler running here. I've got the battery attached to it, and just a handle over here. And come over on this side, we've got this RJ45 going into the iPhone 14, and that goes out to an Ethernet. We're going to follow that where it's going into this Netgear router. And the red cable here is going to my computer. So right now, Aximmetry on the computer and Aximmetry Eye on the iPhone are both plugged into the same router via Ethernet cable, but they don't know each other exists. So what we need to do is change the IP settings of both the computer and of the iPhone and make sure that they can see each other. So the first thing we need to do is go to Settings in Windows. And we're going to hop over to Network and Internet. And then I'm going to go to my Ethernet port. I'm using Wi-Fi for my internet, so I just have this empty Ethernet port. If you are using your Ethernet connection, just use an external USB one specifically for this, or you can configure this and reconfigure it if you're not using the internet while you're using Aximmetry. So go in here, and what we want to do is edit our IP. And I'm going to change this to manual, and we'll turn on IPv4. And I'm just going to type in 192.168.100.99. And we'll make it to a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. Great. So on our iPhone, we are going to open the settings. And you'll notice that right below the Wi-Fi is now an Ethernet option. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click into this interface USB 10100. Yours may be different depending on your device that you're using. So this is set again for an automatic connection. So we want to configure IP, change that to manual, and we're going to type in 192.168.100.100. And we want the same subnet mask as we had on the computer. .0. I'm going to save that. Okay, so that's good. And next thing we're going to do is open up our Aximmetry Eye app. So I've already got the right IP address. So what we want is the IP address of the computer. So just make sure that yours matches whatever you typed in for the computer. And we're going to hit connect. And at this point, we're going to get three options here. We're going to have send camera stream, send tracking data, and receive preview stream. And we would like all of those to be on. So now we're connected to the computer, but we're not seeing or receiving anything. And that's all right for now. What I want to do before we get into everything else is just look at some of the options here. So we have a lock up in the top left corner. We have a orientation lock next to that. Then we have these slider options. And what slider does is give us shutter speed, ISO, white balance, so that we could have everything set manually. We also have a tracker reset. I think that's for if you notice things are slipping, you might want to reset your tracking within the phone. And finally, we have the gear. And the gear takes us to this page, which is It's kind of an expansion on what we saw when we originally logged in. And that has the send camera stream, and this allows us to change the latency between 0 and 10,000. I like to keep it under a second. We have formats from 720p all the way to Ultra HD, and we can set our bit rate here. So anywhere from 1 megabit per second up to 120. For today's purposes, I'm going to use 10, but normally I would have this much higher in a production setting. Audio, which I haven't tested out yet. We could also change the bit rate of how we receive the stream. And I'm going to just go back, and the only thing to do next is hit this icon, and that'll connect to the computer. Over in Aximmetry, we can see that we're seeing the connection from the iPhone. And so I'm just going to reopen our file here. So next we want to set up the origin point at which everything will begin 000 in our Unreal scene. And we also want to set up the bounds of the studio in general and of the green screen itself. All right. First thing I want to do is over in our inputs, when we were setting things up, I turned off the video input. So we're going to turn that back on. And now we can see just a little bit of Frederic Chopin's head here. And if I move the camera, we are getting tracking. Obviously, we're seeing part of the real world and only part of the virtual set. So we're going to need to adjust things.
Hi everyone, Future Elvis here, and I just wanted to chime in and say that if you find that your sync is not working, in this case the sync is good, but you would go to Input 1, and you would scroll down to Tracking Delay, and you can make adjustments. Originally I had this up at 50, which I think is 50 frames, and you just kind of have to see how things are going and adjust accordingly.
First thing we're going to do is go over to the monitor, and you have different options here. So we can change that to just seeing the input, seeing what it looks like when it's keyed, seeing studio. And what we want to do with the studio, so we've got this numbered overlay, we're going to have to set up, you can see those numbers move with the tracking. And what we want to do is build essentially a virtual studio by placing the walls in place and then the boundaries of the green screen. So I'm just going to... But before we do that, we need to set the origin. So I'm going to just tilt down so you can see that Ruko marker nice and clearly. And I'm going to go over to Origin 1 and hit Trigger. And now we see this marker has popped right into the center of the origin. And if I tilt the camera and move it around, you can see that it is locked in place and it's moving in the correct perspective. Next, we're going to go up to the studio. So in terms of building our virtual set, we need to find key points in our real world location. So I'm just going to point to this corner. And what I want to do is go over to the side here in the pin values. I'm going to find the floor, and I just want to lower the floor till it's hitting the corner of where my floor is. So just along this line. We've also got walls that we can move around. So I'm going to move the right wall to also match that spot. And let's go up to the ceiling. I'm just going to bring the ceiling up a little bit. That looks good. We also want to do the front wall, which is what we really want it to match the back of the green screen. So I'm actually going to tilt down. And get it right behind that green screen. We also have the left wall, which in this case doesn't matter so much. Oh, what? So that gives us a good idea of the tracking and how it's working. Now we want to also change the bounds of the green screen. So we want to just mark sort of this area. We want to mark the bottom of the green screen as well. We're going to do that with the, we'll do the top first. So what this is going to do is essentially create a matte within Aximmetry so that as the camera moves around, Aximmetry will know what to keep of the real world and what to use of the virtual world. So green front left and green front right are if you have a flat green screen like this, they mat off the green screen on the sides. But green left and green right are if you have an actual green wall to the left or right that you want to add in. Okay, so at this point, tracking is good. Next, we want to just work on the keying. So I'm going to change over to keyed mode, and we can see that there's a bit of a shadow here. Make this a little larger. So we've got some shadow here. I'm just gonna change the background color, grab our color picker here, find something kind of in the middle value-wise. That looks good. And I'm gonna use the low cut to get rid of the shadow. And we're losing some of the box, so I'll just use the high cut, see if I can get some of that back. There we go. Let's switch this back over to final view. And we do have some problems over here with the green screen. I'm going to see about adjusting that. What I think is happening is the green screen floor is too high. Yes, there we go. So we're going to tilt down again and just get that green screen floor to around here. So it seems like our floor isn't set properly again. I'm just going to adjust that by looking at Studio once more and getting it down to the right spot. There we go. So we essentially have everything we need done. Frederick Chopin is on the bridge. He's moving in space. That's all well and good. But what if we want to change the position of where Frederick Chopin is in the Unreal scene? So what we want to do is select this scene, and we want to use this base camera transform. And what that's going to let us do is just move our origin point within the Unreal scene. So that would take us up or down. We could also spin it around. So let's just move him off to the side. If we were to want to record a take, We can just go onto the record box and hit the record here. And we would be rolling in whatever format we set things up on here. So as we saw there with the cropping, I'm not 100% comfortable with Aximmetry yet. It's still fairly new to me, at least the studio settings and some of the other things. But the great thing about Aximmetry is that there is that demo version that just has the watermark, and you can do all of this. That's what I'm doing all of this in. And so having that demo version plus Aximmetry Eye for free, that really lets you test it out, even if you don't have a cooler for your iPhone, even if you're not using a router and an Ethernet plug. You could just use Wi-Fi and test it out that way until you know you have the basics of this down solid. So next for me, and possibly Frederick Chopin, is that we're going to do a short film with this. I just wrote the script, and hopefully we'll get that in production in the next 2 weeks or so. And I hope to be able to do behind the scenes of that whole process to see if this is actually good enough to use for a short film. In theory, and I haven't tried this yet, but you can mount this on top of a cinema camera, take your HDMI out into your computer and into Aximmetry, and use your cinema camera, your DSLR, and get that image quality with this tracking. Obviously, you'd have to do a little bit of offsetting for where the tracker is sitting above the camera, but that's a real possibility, and that's something I hope to test out. Thanks for watching, and go try it out.